What's up YouTube, it's JackalGoldKick, and in this video I'm going to be talking about 11 things I would want to see in a Dead Rising 5. So Dead Rising is a series I really miss. I like the franchise a lot. I haven't done a Dead Rising game since 2016. If they ever brought Dead Rising back into the 5th game, this is going to be a video of me talking about some of the things I would like to see in a Dead Rising 5 if they decided to make a 5th one. Because this is a really good series. Love Dead Rising 1, love Dead Rising 2. These are great games. This is a really good series. To me, it's like the king of zombie games. Absolutely love Dead Rising. Not a big fan of 3 and 4. I think that's when the series went downhill. I don't like those games. But this is when Dead Rising was good. And if they brought Dead Rising back, it would be cool. Hopefully it'd be more like these games rather than 3 and 4. So yeah, I love this franchise. I miss it a lot. Hopefully they bring it back because these were great games. But yeah, let's get into this. I have the list right here. It's not going to be any particular order of like, you know, what is more important than others in terms of what I want to see. It's just things I picked that I'd like to see in a Dead Rising 5. That's pretty much what it is. So, number 11, one of the things I'd like to see in a Dead Rising 5 is either bring the Dead Rising 1 team back or develop it in-house in Japan where it's actually fully developed in-house like RE2 Remake was. Either one of these things is the best bet for Dead Rising 5, because one of the problems with the Dead Rising series is after the first game, it wasn't really developed in-house anymore. It kind of had different developers attached to it. And Capcom Vancouver, sort of some of the new developers they had for Dead Rising 2, they did a decent job, but it wasn't as good as Dead Rising 1 in my opinion. I think Dead Rising 1 was not only the best when it was part 1, but when it had Japanese developers and it was actually made in-house. And I think the best for this series, in order for it to come back strong and be good again and be what people wanted it to be and to be true Dead Rising again, I think Capcom's best bet is either trying to bring back the Dead Rising 1 team or most of them to make Dead Rising 5, or just completely make it in-house in Japan. Do one of those two things. That way Dead Rising actually has a good future and it can actually be good again, because I feel like either two of those things will definitely make Dead Rising be in good hands, because I don't think giving it back to Capcom Vancouver or going for another developer is really a good idea because of how 3 and 4 turned out. So that's my number 11 thing of what I want to see for Dead Rising 5. So number 10, another thing I would like to see is a more expansive sandbox mode, as well as bringing sandbox mode back, of course. Because sandbox mode wasn't off the record, but it wasn't in 3 and it wasn't in 4. Probably wouldn't make sense to put it in 4 because 4 didn't have a timer, but still, sandbox mode should have stayed in the series because it was a good feature and off the record, a good mode, and I think they should bring it back for Dead Rising 5, but I think they should also expand upon it more. And how I would like to see them expand upon sandbox mode, and what I think would be cool to do with sandbox mode is really expand on it, is what they could do is, number one, I think what they could really do to expand upon sandbox mode is you could have character selection where you can play as all the characters from Dead Rising 1 and Dead Rising 2, or a decent amount of them, where you can play as Frank West, Chuck Green, Brad, Carlito, TK, Sullivan, Stacy, Isabella, Jesse, some of the psychopaths. They all have their own dialogue lines, they all have their own unique animations, they all have their own melee moves, and they all can be leveled up individually. I think that would be really cool to have character selection in sandbox mode, where you can play as a lot of characters and not just what the game gives you. Another thing I think they could do for sandbox mode is have stage selection, where we could go to Willamette Mall, we could go to Still Creek, we could go to Fortune City from Dead Rising 2, we could go to the Case West area, the Phenotrans facility. You know, having different stages and different areas to select from would be cool, because sandbox is a cool mode. Having challenges, being able to dick around and do whatever you want with no time, it is a cool mode, but I think they could expand upon it by not only having different characters to play as, especially if they include some of the ones from a lot of the games, but also having stage selection. Not only having it to where you can play as a lot of characters in sandbox mode this time, but also where you can actually change the stage and change the setting you're in. I think those things would greatly improve sandbox mode and make it an even better mode. And that's something I've always thought about and something I would love to see for sandbox mode. I think that would be really cool. So that's my number 10. Number 9 choice, and another thing I like to see for Dead Rising 5 is more cults. Bring the cults back. I love the cult in Dead Rising 1. The cult in Dead Rising 1 is awesome. They're great. They're cool. Now, technically, yeah, they did have a cult for Dead Rising 4, but it sucked. It was a watered-down version of the DR1 cult. But I would like to see more new cults in the Dead Rising series. The cult was so cool in Dead Rising 1. They were creepy. They were scary. They had a good horror tone to them. Their design was cool. They were just creepy overall, very memorable. One of the best things about Dead Rising 1, I loved the cult. And I wish they would have had a continuation of the cults in Dead Rising. And I would love to see the cult aspect come back to Dead Rising 5. They could do their own kind of cult. They don't even have to copy the Rain cult. They could have a cult where it's a bunch of cults members that wear goat masks or skeleton masks, or maybe they just wear plague masks and they wear these black robes. They could figure something out, but I would like to see more cults in Dead Rising 5, or just in general, bring back the cult. Either, yeah, just bring back the cult in Dead Rising 5. Let's see more of an expansion on the cults, because I think the cult in Dead Rising 1 was cool, and I think Dead Rising should have had more stuff with the cult in the later games. The only one that really did it was 4, and it did it poorly. So yeah, I would love to see something to do with the cult in Dead Rising 5, whether it's, I would like to see more to do with the cult in Dead Rising 5, whether it's bringing back the Raincoat cult, expanding upon them, or just having a whole new cult that's completely different than them. Either way, I want more stuff related to cults to be included in Dead Rising, especially Dead Rising 5. So that's another thing I'd like to see in Dead Rising 5 is a new cult, and I want the cult aspect to come back, because they could make a new cult and make it creepy and scary, but make them different than the Raincoat cult. Maybe they could attack your survivors, try to kidnap them, and also still kidnap you. Maybe if they have the cult aspect back in Dead Rising 5, they could actually make them more involved with the story, to make them even more different than the cult from the first game. In general, I liked the cult aspect of Dead Rising 1. I think they were awesome, and I want to see more cult stuff in Dead Rising. So I would love to see a cult in Dead Rising 5. I would say preferably just make a new one. Don't try to just do the same thing in DR1 where you just have another Raincoat cult. I would say make a whole new cult and do some different things. I just want the cult thing back in Dead Rising. I'd like to see the cult thing come back in Dead Rising 5. That would be really cool. So that's my number 9. Number 8. Another thing I want to see in Dead Rising 5 is a horror tone. Something that was lost with Dead Rising after the first one was the horror tone. Dead Rising used to have a horror tone. It used to have a horror tone. That's what the first Dead Rising game had. It actually had a horror tone. There were scary things about it. The way the zombies looked, how the mall would lose power at nighttime and it would just be dark. The tunnels were creepy. The way the game looked, art style wise, kind of seemed realistic. The zombies were a threat. It was creepy how the survivors could come back as zombies if they got killed by the zombies. Dead Rising 1 had it, and plus the cults, Dead Rising 1 had a good horror tone. But after Dead Rising 1, there was no horror tone. Dead Rising 2 wasn't really scary, Dead Rising 3 wasn't scary, and Dead Rising 4 wasn't scary. None of those games really had a horror tone, and they just lost that. And I'd like to see the horror tone actually come back to Dead Rising. And I think Dead Rising 5 should have a horror tone and try to be scary again, or have at least some semblance of a horror tone like Dead Rising 1 did. Some people claim that Dead Rising was never scary or never had a horror tone. It was always a wacky, goofy game with black comedy, and it was always a mix of horror and comedy. But I disagree with that, because it's that if you choose it to be, especially with Dead Rising 1. I mean, yeah, if you put on a teddy bear mask and a kid outfit in Dead Rising 1, it's going to be goofy, but it's only if you make it that way gameplay-wise. But if you don't make it that way gameplay-wise, and you just play Dead Rising 1 straight as it is, not really doing goofy things with your outfit or weapons, it's a pretty serious game and has a horror tone to it. So I think that's a huge misconception with Dead Rising. So yeah, bring the horror tone back. It's a horror game. I think that's an important thing. So yeah, I miss the horror tone. I love that about Dead Rising 1. And I think it was lacking in the sequels, and I would love to see it come back in Dead Rising 5. I would love to see a horror tone, to be scary somewhat. That would be something cool to see come back from the first game, because no sequels had that at all, which was disappointing, because it's one of the reasons Dead Rising 1's my favorite, because I love the horror tone it has. Just a lot of the things I explained, I missed the horror tone, and I want it to come back in Dead Rising 5. So that's my number 8. Number 7. Another thing I'd like to see in Dead Rising 5 is I want the regular weapons to be improved. Now, I don't know how you could do this because ever since they introduced combo weapons in Dead Rising 2, it kind of seems like the regular weapons took a hit. So I would say there's two ways they could go about this. Either make the regular weapons back to how they were in the first game while having combo weapons, or get rid of combo weapons and just keep regular weapons. There's either two ways you can go about that. Either way, I want the regular weapons to actually be how they used to be in the first game. I mean, combo weapons are cool, but I don't like how the regular weapons, I don't like how as soon as the combo weapons were introduced, the regular weapons became downgraded. The baseball bat and like the 2x4 and the machete, a lot of those weapons just weren't as powerful and strong in the sequels as they were in the first game, especially some of the guns. The shotgun in the first Dead Rising is great. It's trash in Dead Rising 2. I mean, yeah, the shotgun is okay in Dead Rising 2, but I still think the shotgun in Dead Rising 1 is better. And I just think that with Dead Rising 5, they need to find a way to make the regular weapons actually good again, actually strong again, and have the same power and strength they did in Dead Rising 1, whether that's balancing them with the combo weapons somehow, or just getting rid of the combo weapons and having the regular weapons be strong again. Because when you have combo weapons in there, and you have all the other weapons that are regular get downgraded, it kind of defeats the whole purpose of what Dead Rising 1 had, which is literally where it says anything and everything is a weapon. It's hard to really consider anything and everything as a weapon when the best weapons are combo weapons. So yeah, I'd like to see the regular weapons in Dead Rising 5 be good again, be strong, not be nerfed, and actually be how they were in Dead Rising 1, where they were actually good weapons. Unlike all the sequels that just watered down the regular weapons, especially because of combo weapons. So yeah, they should figure out some way to fix that. So that's something I want to see for Dead Rising 5, because it's fun to use the regular weapons too. I like the combo weapons, but it's fun to use the regular weapons as well. And plus, they're more convenient and easier to get than a combo weapon. At least you compare DR1 and 2, because with combo weapons, you gotta go find the things and you gotta make it. With the regular weapons, you just grab it and you have it. And some of the boss weapons in Dead Rising 1 were extremely powerful, like Cliff's machete, Larry's cleaver, and like Adam's chainsaw. So in some ways, the regular weapons are more convenient than combo weapons. But with 3 and 4, combo weapons are easier to have because you can just make them on the fly and stuff. But yeah, that's something else I'd like to see for Dead Rising 5. Improved regular weapons. So that's my number 7. Number 6, another thing I'd like to see for Dead Rising 5 is I want to see the MT framework engine come back. If Dead Rising ever returns, my guess is they would probably use the RE engine, because that's their brand new engine for Resident Evil and Devil May Cry. And I don't know how it would be with Dead Rising. Maybe the RE engine could be good. I just don't know if it would work for Dead Rising, because Dead Rising is a game that's always pushed graphical boundaries, especially the first game with the graphic style and all the zombies on screen. And I just don't think the RE engine can handle that, because if you play Resident Evil 3 Remake, even as good as that game looks, when you're far away from zombies, they lag frame rate wise. That didn't happen in Dead Rising 1. And the fact that that happened for RE3 Remake, and that was just a few zombies, I really don't think the RE engine could handle Dead Rising's stuff with all the zombies on screen and the good graphic detail. I just don't think the RE engine could handle Dead Rising, so I don't even know if they could use it technically wise. But I would want to see the MT framework engine come back. I want to see the MT framework engine come back for Dead Rising, especially for Dead Rising 5. I loved the MT framework engine. It was the best engine for Dead Rising. It's what Dead Rising started with. The whole reason MT framework engine exists is because of Dead Rising. And that's one of the things I loved about Dead Rising 1, is I liked how the game looked, how certain weapons looked, how the zombie models looked, and it was because of the great MT framework engine. The MT framework engine was great, it was powerful, and I don't know why they stopped using it after the first one. Every single Dead Rising game after the first one didn't use the MT framework engine anymore. Dead Rising 2 was supposed to use it, but they just decided not to, which is a shame. I like the MT framework engine. It's what started with Dead Rising. It's powerful, and I like the look and style of Dead Rising 1. And I wish that all the other Dead Rising games, and if they also ever make a Dead Rising 5, would just keep the look and style of Dead Rising 1. I think the MT framework engine is awesome, it's powerful, it's impressive, and I want them to bring it back. I would love to see it for Dead Rising 5, because it would be way more high quality. It would be extraordinary to see what Dead Rising 5 would look like nowadays with new technology, with the MT Framework engine, it would look incredible. It would probably even look better than the RE engine, because the MT Framework engine was impressive. Dead Rising 1 was really impressive when it first came out. It didn't really have a lot of frame rate issues, so many zombies on screen. It looked very high quality. I still think it holds up graphically and it has a lot of color to it. That engine is just so impressive. And just imagine how that engine would be if it was upgraded with new technology, with a brand new Dead Rising game. It would be even better. It would look incredible. And I would love to see the MT Framework engine come back. That's something I think would be really cool to see for Dead Rising 5. So it could bring it back to the DR1 style, have more of a higher quality. Some other reasons I'd want them to have an MT Framework engine is Dead Rising 1 had the best looking zombie models. A lot of that had to do with quality and, you know, having quality, of course, because Dead Rising 2 did have decent looking zombie models, but they decided to have more zombies on screen, which downscaled the graphics, which did hurt the zombie models. But the best looking zombie models were in Dead Rising 1, and a lot of that has to do with, I imagine, the MT Framework engine. And the MT Framework engine plus the zombie models in Dead Rising 1 was great. And I think if they use the MT Framework engine for Dead Rising 5, we could have great zombie models again, much like Dead Rising 1. I would just love to see the MT Framework engine come back for Dead Rising 5. That should be the standard engine for all Dead Rising games here on out. I want that DR1 look and style back because it was great, and it's what I liked the most for Dead Rising. I like the way the characters look in Dead Rising 1. I like the art style, the zombie models, the entire game itself and the style of it I love, and I want to see that back for Dead Rising 5. So yeah, bring back the MT Framework engine for Dead Rising 5. That's an amazing engine, and I would rather see them use that than RE engine. I mean, I'm sure graphically the RE engine would look good with the new Dead Rising game, but I don't think the RE engine could handle a Dead Rising game. There's too many zombies on screen. It wouldn't work in my opinion. Like I said, you look at Resident Evil 3 Remake, and plus one of the things I noticed about the RE engine is, like with Resident Evil 2 Remake and kind of with Resident Evil 7, there's not a lot of color that pops. They kind of had that in 3 Remake, but even in Devil May Cry 5 I noticed there's not a lot of color that pops. And that's something I don't want it to come back to Dead Rising, because Dead Rising always had this bright, vibrant color scheme to it, and that's something RE engine kind of doesn't have. So I don't think the RE engine, you know, realistically should be used for Dead Rising unless they upgrade it tremendously and wait to make Dead Rising 5 on PlayStation 6, where it's massively improved and it might be able to handle Dead Rising and have color pop into it. I think the best case scenario would be using the MT Framework engine. I don't think the RE engine would make sense for Dead Rising. I just don't think it could handle it. The zombies had frame rate drops in Resident Evil 3 Remake, and just imagine that with Dead Rising with all those zombies on screen. Even with DR1's zombies on screen, like if you wanted to scale it back and only have as many zombies as DR1 and not like 3 and 4, I still don't think it could handle it, because it's got to process all the new graphics, all the stuff going on, and the zombies on screen. The RE engine could not handle that. And like I said, I proved that with what I said about 3 Remake, and plus, I feel like it wouldn't carry over the color that you like from the early Dead Rising games, the bright vibrantness, because RE2 Remake and RE7 didn't have that. That's another thing I would love to see in Dead Rising 5, my number 6 choice. So my number 5 choice, another thing I want to see for Dead Rising 5 is an interesting setting. We haven't really had an interesting setting for a Dead Rising game since like the second one. So yeah, this is something else I'd want for Dead Rising 5, is I would want an interesting setting. A setting that's interesting, that's memorable, and that's actually good. Because the setting in Dead Rising 3 I did not like. The setting in Dead Rising 4 I did not like. They're way bigger, way more forgettable, and just not really that great. The setting of Dead Rising 1 and 2 were great, they were memorable, and they were cool. And I would say another thing to do with the setting of Dead Rising 5 is probably try to keep it simple and more small scale, and not try to be bigger and better just because you can be bigger and better. Because a lot of times, just because you can be bigger and better doesn't mean it's actually good. A lot of times when you're more small scaled and a lot more focused of an area, you can do a lot better. That's why Dead Rising 1 and 2, or even like Case Zero, Dead Rising 2 K0's city is way smaller than Dead Rising 3's city, and yet it's a better setting than Part 3, because with a smaller area and with less stuff to do, they could put more into it, whereas if it's a huge, bigger area, they won't put as much into it. They'll just copy and paste a lot of areas, and it won't be as good. And I would also want like a mall for Dead Rising 5. I would definitely like to see a mall. A mall would be cool. I'd love to see the malls come back. I think that's an essential part of Dead Rising. In terms of a setting of Dead Rising 5, I would say they could do like a mall and like some kind of, like they could do a mall and they could do like, maybe like how GTA Vice City was, where it's like beach-like but with a mall and it's summery. They could do that. They could do a mall in some kind of town set in Halloween. They could have it be set on an island with an insane asylum and certain things like that, and then maybe a mall on that island. Something like that. But whatever it is, I want an interesting setting for Dead Rising 5 that's interesting to explore, that's memorable, and that is just as good as the settings from Dead Rising 1 and 2, because I did not like the setting of Dead Rising 3 and 4. And yeah, we need an interesting setting for Dead Rising 5 that's interesting, we want to explore it, and that's memorable. That's something we need for Dead Rising 5. Bring back an interesting setting and small scale it if you have to. We don't need the biggest area ever. You know, as long as it's interesting and memorable. Hell, Dead Rising 1 still is an impressive setting, and it's still pretty good. And Dead Rising 2 is even a little bit bigger than Dead Rising 1. But just have a good setting for Dead Rising 5. Yeah. But yeah, have a good setting for Dead Rising 5. It's very important. We need an interesting setting for Dead Rising 5. Small scaled if you have to. Just give us a good setting with a mall and stuff like that. So that's my number 5 choice. Number 4 choice, something else I want to see in Dead Rising 5 is good characters. This includes main character and story characters. Dead Rising has had a lot of crappy characters for the past 2 games. Dead Rising 1 had really good characters. Dead Rising 2 had some good characters as well. There was a few, like the twins and Rebecca, that I didn't really care for, but the characters were mostly good in Dead Rising 1 and 2. But Dead Rising 3 and 4, the characters really weren't that great. They weren't interesting, they weren't that great. Even the main characters sucked in Dead Rising 3 and 4. And I think another thing they should do with Dead Rising 5 is actually have good characters. Give us an interesting main character, and also have the other characters be interesting. Have the psychopaths be interesting. Have the characters in the story be interesting. Have the character we're playing as interesting. Make sure that's something you nail with Dead Rising 5. In terms of a main character though, like on the good characters discussion, I don't know what they could do. They could either bring Frank West back, Chuck Green back, or we play as Katie or Stacy, or we play as Isabella, or we play as one of the other characters that are still alive, or they just make a new character. I'm not really sure what would be the best direction to go, but I would say one of the key Dead Rising characters we return as, or just give us a new character to play as. One of those two, go for that. Whatever you decide to do, whether we're playing as a series veteran or a new character, or one of the other characters in the story like Stacy or something, just make sure that the characters are actually interesting and good, like how the first 2 games did it, and not like how 3 and 4 did it. So yeah, give us some good characters for Dead Rising 5, because I care about having good characters, not just killing zombies. It adds to the game. So that's my number 4. Number 3 choice, another thing I want to see in Dead Rising 5 is a good story. I mean, Dead Rising used to have a good story. Dead Rising 1 had the best story. Dead Rising 2's story, well, it wasn't as good as Dead Rising 1's story, but it was still pretty good. The story in Dead Rising 3 and 4, though, I didn't care about. Dead Rising 3's story was stupid. Chuck sent someone to find his daughter. Bullshit. He would have did it himself. Fucking making Isabella Keys a villain. All that dumbass shit. Carlito having a cure and Nick, which makes no fucking sense, because Carlito was a villain. Why the fuck would Nick have a cure in him? That's stupid. And then Dead Rising 4, Barnaby wanted to be immortal, when that completely contradicts what the point of that was in Dead Rising 1, where they were just trying to reduce cattle and the overuse of meats in America and stuff like that. It's just so much contradiction. The Santa Cabeza virus, this is old, so Frank, you can't get bit because you can't be cured, even though he was cured from that virus for Dead Rising 1 with the Nick thing in DR3. It's just, the story sucks in Dead Rising 3 and 4. Whereas the story 1 and 2 are actually good, and Case West is a good story as well. So we need a good story for Dead Rising 5. We need a story that's interesting, that's good, and that's just exciting. We need good writing interesting characters, like I said before. We just need a good story overall for Dead Rising 5. A story that adds to the game, that's interesting, that you like, and that you can remember. We need an interesting story and a memorable, good story overall with good writing and good characters for Dead Rising 5. That would be really cool. That's what Dead Rising 1 and 2 had, and Dead Rising 5 needs that as well. That's one of the things that just it adds to the game and makes it even better. So yeah, we need a good story for Dead Rising 5. Because Dead Rising 3 and 4 did not have good stories. So that's my number 3 choice. Number 2 choice for something else I want to see in Dead Rising 5 is make it challenging again. Dead Rising hasn't really been challenging in a long time. And I would say preferably make it challenging like Dead Rising 1 was. I mean, Dead Rising 2 is challenging somewhat with like the psychopaths and like the gas zombies and the bosses for sure. But Dead Rising 2 definitely wasn't as hard as the first one in some cases because the survivor AI was smart, so it was easy to rescue them and escort them back to the safe house. Dead Rising 1 was brutal and punishing challenge-wise. So I would say with Dead Rising 5, I want to see it be challenging again and actually be difficult, because that's what makes Dead Rising, being difficult and stuff like that. Because when Dead Rising got too easy with Part 3 and Part 4, it just became boring and it just wasn't fun. Because it's like there's no challenge in Dead Rising 3 and 4. You just slaughter through zombies like they're nothing. The zombies actually used to be a threat. The psychopaths used to be a threat. It was hard to rescue survivors. All that stuff needs to come back in Dead Rising 5. Because it was just too fucking easy in 3 and 4. Just slaughtering through zombies like they're just meat puppets. Like they're meaningless. The zombies might as well not even be there because they're not even a threat. Survivors are so easy to rescue. They just need to take Dead Rising 5 and make it challenging, preferably like how Dead Rising 1 was. Have challenging bosses. Have the survivors be hard to rescue, where the survivor AI is stupid like Dead Rising 1, so it's challenging again. Or if you don't want to make the survivor AI stupid, find a way to still make escorting survivors challenging without making their AI stupid. Figure something out. I would say just make it challenging like Dead Rising 1 was. Make it to where the psychopaths are hard. Make it to where the zombies are actually a threat. Make it to where it's challenging to rescue survivors, whether you figure something else out or it's more like DR1, stupid survivor AI. That way it's rewarding to bring them back. And yeah, just make it challenging again. As well as the last and next thing I'll talk about with Dead Rising 5. Just make sure Dead Rising 5 is challenging, much like the first one. Dead Rising being super easy like 3 and 4 just isn't fun, and I don't fucking care for it. I need some type of challenge and difficulty in Dead Rising, or it's just not really fun. Like, I don't like playing games that are just too fucking easy, because it's boring to me. So yeah, that's my number 2 choice. And plus, Dead Rising, roots-wise, Dead Rising was born on being challenging and difficulty, and to get away from that is just going away from the roots of the series. So that's my number 2 choice. So my number 1 choice of the last thing, my number 1 choice of what I want to see in Dead Rising 5 is the timer. And the last thing I'll say I want to see in Dead Rising 5, yeah, the timer. The timer should come back, and the timer should be strict again as well. The timer is a very important and an essential thing to Dead Rising. Dead Rising without its timer is not Dead Rising. It's generic. It turns into a generic zombie killing simulator game. It doesn't feel unique. It doesn't feel original. The timer is so essential and so important to Dead Rising, and I want to see it come back. The timer was great in Dead Rising 1 and 2. It was strict. You had to manage your time, killing zombies, solving case files, rescuing survivors, fighting psychopaths. All this shit you had to do while managing your time to beat the clock was fun. It made Dead Rising unique. It made it stand out. It made it distinctive, because not a lot of games have timers. A lot of games still don't have timers, and I like that about Dead Rising. It's what made it stand out, and the timer needs to come back to Dead Rising. It's an important and an essential thing to Dead Rising, and I don't want the timer to just stay gone. I want it to come back, because in Dead Rising 3, yeah, there was a timer, but it wasn't even that strict, and it might as well not even just been there because you got so much time. And don't try to tell me that Nightmare Mode is the way that you can do Dead Rising 3 with a classic timer, because Nightmare Mode didn't even fucking make a difference in my opinion. I mean, maybe it did, but I hate when some people use Nightmare Mode as an excuse for Dead Rising 3's very, like, just safe timer. Like, even with Nightmare Mode, Dead Rising 3 still sucks. It's still not even challenging. So Nightmare Mode, I don't even care about that. But yeah, the timer in Dead Rising 3 wasn't even that strict. And then in Dead Rising 4, there was no timer at all. It was just ridiculous. The game felt generic. It felt like every other open world game. There was just no timer. You can spend as much time as you want doing anything. It took away so much originality and distinctiveness and uniqueness about Dead Rising. It took away a lot that made Dead Rising special and unique. So yeah, I would love to see the timer come back for Dead Rising 5. That's an important thing. It's what makes the series stand out and makes it original and makes it distinctive. I want to see it come back. That also ties into the thing I said before it with making Dead Rising 5 more challenging, preferably like the first one, as well as bringing the timer back. I would love to see their timer come back to Dead Rising 5 where it's strict again. You got to manage it while doing all this other stuff. It would make Dead Rising original, distinctive, and unique again. And it would still stand out nowadays if they brought it back, because not a lot of games have a timer. So yeah, my number one choice, timer. Bring the timer back for Dead Rising 5. That's an important part of Dead Rising. We need it back. It's bullshit that DR4 got rid of it. It made the series feel generic. So that's really all I got to say in this video for 11 things that I want to see in Dead Rising 5. Just a wish list kind of video. Let me know what you would want to see in a Dead Rising 5 if they ever made one. Really all I gotta say in this video. Peace.